Okay, I'm a recovered alcoholic. My name's Tony. Sobriety date's April 8th, 1989. How we open this meetings with the Serenity Prayer.
All right.
What do we need for a good meeting? God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. How many people is looking like for a new experience in their lives? Well, it's kind of like a new experience. How many people came here hoping they'd find a solution to a problem they weren't too sure of? How many people are looking forward to their past being their future? Okay, so we all agree on that one, right? There's certain mechanics that happen in the basic text that a lot of people are really unfamiliar with. And there's so much hype on this side of it that people are really, really cautious going into it because they don't understand the mechanics of it. When you understand the mechanics of it and the purpose of it, it makes a lot more sense. All the way from step 1 to step 2 to step 3 and all the way through this process. We use the basic text put together by the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous that outlines the program of recovery that we hear and how it works. How many people has heard how it works here? How many people would like to explain it? Okay, so, right? So we listen to something all the time, we go, oh yeah, and then we try to formulate our own ideas what it means. Anybody ever do that? How many people come here, look at the wall, and try to figure out what they meant by their statements? Yeah. There's two different statements, what you're doing. So if you were talking to them, they would be talking from a place of experience, and you'd be talking from a place of learning, right? And if you're alcoholic, you would already know what they're talking about before you even... Anybody already know everything here? Anybody like topic meetings here? Let's talk in great lengths about stuff I have no idea about. So this is kind of weird, but if you're not at the 4, it's okay, right? We're going to hit some highlights of the 4, so when you're at it, you'll see the purpose of it. You'll understand why you kind of need to do it and the mechanics of it. Because the mechanics of 4 allows you to do 10 and 11, but mostly 11, right? We hear so many different ideas on how to do this, but that's not really backed up in our literature. We have a lot of other people's influences and ideas coming into the fellowship of AA, and it sounds good, so people adopt that idea as being the program of recovery, and it isn't. Anybody ever relapse here? So you missed something the first time. Right? But we thought, how many people thought they did good? I got 3 months before. Well, if you're looking for 3 months again, continue to do what you were doing. Right? What they say here is they have a solution when applied to your life will remove the illness of alcoholism from your life. You're still an alcoholic, but you're no longer suffering from alcoholism. And once you're no longer suffering from alcoholism, then you could deal with the real problem. Anybody know what the real problem is once you remove alcohol? Yeah, I had Milton gave me this little sticker. I'd never caught it at first. He says, go home and put this on the mirror. So I went home and I put it on the mirror. It took me about a week before I caught on to it. It says, you are now looking at the problem. I thought it was for my girlfriend. Later I found out it was for me. Okay, so what is the purpose of step 1 when we go through the process in the book? So when we get to We Agnostics, it's a summary of a highlight of everything we've done. We have the worksheets back there that takes you through the format of the book. And so one of the things that's really interesting about the book is when they start a new chapter, they'll tell you what the previous chapter was for. It's like when you get to more about alcoholism, what do you think they'll be talking about there? More about alcoholism. So they're under the impression you already have the basic understanding of alcoholism. How many symptoms are there in alcoholism? 2. There are 2 symptoms. A lot of people like to add to that. Yes, there may be other problems, but there's only 2 symptoms in alcoholism. So when we get to We Agnostics, they kind of cover what they are, right? And they also tell you what the preceding chapters were for, right? And so by the time you get here, you've gone through the doctor's opinion, you've gone through the forwards. Hopefully you have a sponsor that's taking you through this, or you go through the worksheets to see to get the basic fundamental idea of what the problem is, what the solution is, and what the course of action is from whose understanding? From their understanding. So by the time you get here, all the information you have acquired is from them. And now is the first time they really ask you to diagnose yourself, right? So we find out what the preceding chapters are for. You want to lay us on everybody on page 44?
Sure. Catherine, alcoholic? Catherine. In the preceding chapters, you have learned something of alcoholism. We hope we have made clear the distinction between the alcoholic and the non-alcoholic.
Have they done that?
Yes.
So by the time you've gone through all those chapters, you'll know what type of alcoholic you are. So if I walked around and asked everybody individually what type of alcoholic you are, would you be able to say, I'm this type or that type? Or most people wouldn't know what that is. And I mean that in the most... I had George ask me that. I was 11 years in and out, and he asked me what an alcoholic was. And I wasn't able to tell him what alcoholism was. I told him all the behaviors associated with alcoholism or being too drunk, the fighting, the jails, the institution, the car wrecks, the marriages, the relationships. He says, none of that makes you an alcoholic. It makes you an asshole, but it doesn't make you an alcoholic. I don't like George, but he's my sponsor. You're not supposed to like him, right? Like, my sponsor's job was to disturb me on a constant basis, right? And he did a really good job, right? And Chuck used to say, he'd hear me at a meeting, he says, oh, that sounded great. He says, can you show me where it says that? So when you're sharing at a meeting, and if somebody was come up to you and say, hey, can you show me everything you're talking about in here? Can you show me that? Would you be able to show them what you're talking about? Most people can't because they formulated a talk based on what they heard at other meetings. So they've accumulated ideas that make sense to them that they start sharing at other meetings. So what they're really sharing is other people's experience, hoping it's their own. Right? And we're that type of people. When we talk about something long enough, we actually think it's true. I don't know anybody like that here? And then when we relapse, we're surprised. Anybody ever relapse here? Anybody give themselves a hard time for relapsing? As soon as you do that, what you're saying is you don't understand alcoholism. Because as soon as you start giving yourself a hard time, what you're saying is you should know better, and you have a behavioral problem. But if you have an illness, what's the promise of step one? You're in relapse mode. You're suffering from alcoholism. So when you're talking, if you were to talk to these people that put it together, you're talking from two different points of view. You're talking from a person who's looking for a solution or try to understand a problem that you're suffering from. They're talking from a place of having recovered from a course of action. So they talk about they were powerless over alcohol. They're no longer powerless over alcohol. So if you're doing step one, you'd be saying, I am powerless over alcohol because you haven't obtained the solution yet. You're still suffering from a problem that they found a solution to. That's why they say in how it works, here are the steps we took which are suggested as a program of recovery. They have the practical application of putting this in place that allows them to recover from the illness that had them hopelessly defeated before. Right? Seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. We understand what that means.
If when you honestly want to, you find you cannot quit entirely.
So what symptom is that?
Malady.
How many people say the allergy? So we'll read it again slowly. And this is one of the things Chuck taught me how to do is read the book. Because what I do is I start thinking as I read. Any thinkers here? And I already think I know the answer. Anybody ever do the sheets and have a heck of a time doing them because you're looking for what you think it should say? How many people has gone over the same page about 5 times to realize your answer isn't on there? And then you actually put the answer that was meant to be presented as information, right? So, read that again.
If, when you honestly want to, you find you cannot quit entirely.
So, quit entirely means I've stopped, but I've started again, right? Stopping means stop entirely means including weekends and holidays. How many people found that surprising? What do you mean, weekends and holidays too? What an order. I can't go through with it. We know. Right? So when you get here, the idea of never drinking again, how many people did that kind of give you a little bit of a panic? Because that's the only solution, regardless of the consequences and the pain and suffering associated with it. Our problem, we think, is the consequences. If I could just drink without consequence, I'll be okay. How many people were hoping to find a way to drink without consequence? Got a smile over there, right? Identification. It's okay. This is not entrapment, right? So it kind of is, eh? So what happens is that we find that we can't drink with impunity. We can't drink without consequence on a continuous basis. Why is that?
The malady.
Because of the allergy, right? If I have an abnormal reaction to alcohol, I get thirstier when I drink. Anybody like that here? Regardless of what happens to me, I'll go have another drink. Bill talked about that in the story. People were jumping from high places when the stock market went to hell in a handbasket. He would not jump. What did he do? Went back to the bar. How many people had a problem here and took it to the bar?
Oh, yeah.
And if you stay in the bar long enough, your problem will go away. You ever notice that? Unless it's a warrant. That stays continuously, right? Those things don't go away, right? Okay. So it's the malady. It's the condition that they talked about on page 23 is the main problem of the alcoholic that centers in the mind. And then they really elaborated on page 37. They describe it as a phenomena, an unexplainable event that happens with people like us. We try to explain why we relapse, but it's an unexplainable event. It's a malady, a condition that centers in our mind, right? And so what they're saying is, here's pictures what it looks like. And then what you do is go back in your drinking history to see if you've exhibit that characteristic. If you've exhibit that characteristic, then that means what we'll find out later is you've placed yourself beyond human aid, that you can't trust you to keep you sober, that you're doing an act against your own will. How many people's done an act against their own will here more than a couple times? How many people would pass a lie detector test here that I'm never going to do it again? Snot running from your nose, that position. Anybody been there? You talk loved ones, family, the horrid look on their faces, your kids, and that pit in your stomach, and you would do anything to quit and never do it again. Anybody been there? And then how many people did it again? So now you've moved from a behavioral problem into an illness, right? Now the problem starts. Because if I can't stop myself from starting, I got a real problem now. It didn't mean I can't stay sober for periods of time, which is called abstinence. It's not called sobriety. So a lot of people come into the fellowship and experience abstinence and confuse it for recovery. Right? You will feel better when you stop drinking. Anybody? And then you start feeling a lot worse. Anybody notice the longer you are in between drinks, the worse your mental health gets? And the worst everybody around you gets. Those people. Anybody have problems with those people? Why are they always picking on me? Okay, sorry. Go ahead.
Or if when drinking you have little control over the amount you take, you are probably alcoholic.
So what symptom is that?
The body.
The allergy. And they describe, the seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. They've covered those two symptoms in great detail, and they give you pictures of what it looks like. The guy suddenly thought putting an ounce of whiskey in his milk. As he crossed the threshold to the dining room, not a cloud on the horizon, not a problem in the world. So if he did a self-check-in, he would say, "Self, what do you think? I think you're doing good." What would go good with doing good? A couple highballers. And back to the puzzle factory, a treatment center, recovery house, or whatever it is, right? Back, locking myself up for meat. Why do we go to halfway houses and treatment centers? It is a modern day asylum. You're looking for protection from who? Yeah, so AA is kind of like witness protection. We're trying to give you a new identity. There's been somebody trying to kill you, and you find it really surprising when it's been you. Oh my God, it's me. Right? So we're going to we'll give you a handler, and you got to check in on a daily basis. As long as you keep this in new identity, you don't have to worry about going back to, right? Okay, that was fun. Okay.
If that be the case, you may be suffering from an illness which only a spiritual experience will conquer.
So, did they ask you what that means?
No.
They tell you what that means. And where would you find out what they mean by that? the spiritual appendix in the back of the book. And then they give you an example of that in Bill's story, and they give you two examples of that in a doctor's opinion, and they give you examples of that through the stories of those who became sold on the ideas contained in this book, applied it to their lives, and recovered. Right? So they talk about that. So far in the book, they've talked about the problem, the solution, and the course of action. They just haven't talked about step one. They give you the whole package. So now, if I need a psychic change or spiritual experience, and if I went to you at this time, choose a God of your own understanding, you'd defeat yourself. The book doesn't say that. People read it as that. They start telling new people that. Well, choose God as you understand him. The book doesn't say that. What it says is, we'll explain to you what the solution is. We'll explain to you what we mean by this power greater. We'll explain to you what it means and how to access it. And then you could choose your own conception on what we're talking about. Right? Because we find out lack of power is our dilemma on the next page. And explains what that means is, if a better philosophy of living, how many people tried that? Better philosophy, being nicer, going to church, opening the door for people, trying not to trip old people, like being nice. Anybody ever try nice sobriety? Go to the meeting and talk about how spiritual you are as you're at home weaving a rope, You ever notice before you get to a meeting, like you're batshit crazy? Like you're screaming in your own head, like the voices are so loud you got to talk out loud? That's because the energy gets so much that you can't contain it anymore, that you actually got to start talking to yourself to release it. Thank God they have those earpieces now, so everybody looks normal. Mm-hmm. But before cell phones, this is what us untreated look like in cars. Lips moving, head moving, hands going. People go, what the hell, stay away from that person. Now you see one of you doing that in the car, you think you're talking to somebody, right? Yeah. Anyway, anybody ever been in a room alone and you're having an argument with yourself? And somebody goes, what are you doing? You say, mind your own business. This is personal. So, lack of power, we understand, to create the change necessary to recover from an illness that's killing me. Right? And so they go through here and they say you are governed by belief and energy. But your belief system and where you spend your energy is working toward your demise. So they talk about that on page 54, 55. And there's a lot of different things here because they talk to the atheist, and they talk to the true believer, and they talk to the agnostic. All three of them have the same problem. Their understanding of things isn't working for them, and it isn't spelling the necessary change necessary to recover. Their belief system is working toward their demise instead of their betterment. So by the time they get here on page 55, they talk about, and you can read it later, we've gone through it in great detail, that we do have a belief system. Where you spend all your energy and your thinking is your belief system. So all day, what you spent thinking about, you believe to be true. And you're acting like it's going to happen, and you're spending your energy or your faith in believing that it's going to happen, and there's nothing happening. How many people spent a lot of time thinking about stuff that's not happening? Mm-hmm. Or thinking about stuff that did happen, and they're trying to make it change. Mm-hmm. Or make them pay again. How many people spend a lot of time in the past here? How many people spend a lot of time in the future? And then how many people spend a lot of time in make-believe? So what you do is you create a euphoric, you think about something strong enough where it creates a euphoric feeling within inside of you and nothing's happening. How many people daydreamed about spending the lottery here? And get depressed when you don't win. Yeah. So 54, 55, then they talk about, because we understand what they mean by this power and where this power is located, right? And the bare minimum in step 2 is, say, being willing to believe that there is a power greater than myself, and if I do this course of action as laid out by those that went before me, I'll have the same experience. A lot of people say step 2 is about having God. It's not about having God. It's about believing that there is a course of action and a power greater than myself, or even a willingness to be willing that there is this power, and sidestepping all my thinking. So on page 55, they talk about where am I to find this power that they talk about. And this is the essence of what they mean when they talk about God as we understood him. They're all in agreement of the solution. They all agree on where the solution is. Every single one of them agree, and this is the essence of it on page 55. Actually,
we were fooling ourselves, for deep down in every man, woman, and child is the fundamental idea of God. It may be obscured by calamity, by pomp, by worship of other things, but in some form or other it is there.
So what is calamity? Noise where? In your own mind. How many people got a lot of calamity going on? They got a full 10-piece band playing. Okay. And you're Mr. Bean trying to sing. Okay. And worship. How many people worship things? Worship means where you spend your energy. So if you looked at where you spent your energy, that's a form of worship, isn't it? Is it constructive or destructive where you spend your time and energy? And based on your thinking, how are you feeling? So are you anxiety-based? Are you fear-based? Are you conflict-based? Are you in constant tension and worry? Do you spend a lot of time absent from the moment? Physically, you're here, but emotionally and mentally, you're somewhere else. That's forms of worship, of bondage, and all these other things that cripple us. Unless we find a solution to that, how well will we survive sobriety? How many people has relapsed here? Because you didn't find a solution suitable enough for you to be comfortable within your own skin. You haven't found the peace and contentment that they talk about necessary in order to recover. You haven't made peace with you. Anybody would say that's a kind of... Yeah. Okay.
For faith in a power greater than ourselves and miraculous demonstrations of that power in human lives are facts as old as man himself.
And we see all those demonstrations within the fellowship. How many people heard people's story and then you see where they're at now and you can't believe that they're the same person? It's like remarkable what happens in the fellowship of AA from where people come from and where they end up in the lives they live. What's the common thread between these people is this course of action that's put together so they all have the same experience. Once you do this, you have the same understanding of what the problem is, what the solution is, and the same experience on the course of action. You become a part of the collective. You're no longer a singular experience. And even in your experience is not singular. You find out everybody that went before you had suffered or is still suffering from the thing that you're trying to overcome. Right?
We finally saw that faith in some kind of God was a part of our makeup, just as much as the feeling we have for a friend. Sometimes we had to search fearlessly, but he was there. He was as much a fact as we were. We found the great reality deep down within us.
Where? In some of us or all of us?
All of us.
So when they talk about actually we're fooling ourselves, for deep down in every man, woman, and child is a fundamental idea of God. This energy, this power, this thing that wants better for you, this thing that talks to you in your darkest hour, this thing that tells you there's a different possibility of a different story for you. How many people's had that voice? How many people's had that thing at your most darkest hour said, hey, and it gave you comfort and it created a shift inside of you where you're able to overcome that moment and seek help, come to a fellowship, come to a meeting? How many people in their darkest hour, something, and you felt the weight of that? You notice in your shoulders are like it's heavy. Anybody been heavy here? And then someone gives you some hope and it kind of just gives you, it lifts you. You ever watch people who are kind of, I don't want to say, who are solution-oriented? They have a different walk about them. They have a different demeanor about them. There's just something different about them. When Bill seen Ebby, what was the first thing Bill noticed about Ebby when he opened the door? There was something different about him. Ebby didn't have to spend half an hour trying to convince Bill that he changed. Anybody spend a lot of time trying to convince people that they changed? I've really changed, honest. Okay, I could see that. Good. You got $20? No. Sorry.
In the last analysis, it is only there that he may be found.
So what does that mean in the last analysis?
After thought about it.
After trying everything else. How many people's tried everything else here to change their lives? We have to be pretty mangled in order to commence this way of living. Like, we're not wimps, huh? We're strong-willed people. Like the beating we give ourselves is far worse than anybody's beating they've ever given us. They're amateurs compared to what we can do to ourselves. Anybody? Huh? We're black belts and kicking our ass. Oh, sorry.
It was so with us. We can only clear the ground a bit. If our testimony helps sweep away prejudice, enables you to think honestly, encourages you to search diligently within yourself, then, if you wish, you can join us on the broad highway.
So how many people's had that voice? Like when I look back over my life, in my darkest hours, there's something. I remember, I've said this many times, I came to, I don't know, I was at home, I was lying on my back, and the voice just said that it got my attention, don't fall asleep on your back. And I turned over. That's the only thing I remember of that whole week was that one voice. Where sometimes I'd end up in a place that say, leave now. Anybody ever have that voice? Anybody ignore that voice? But you did have it, right? Well, should have listened to myself. How many people's had that now? What? Okay. So what they talk about is clearing the ground to find this entity, this energy, this life force that we already have that enables us to be the human experience, right? So in the fourth step, where we're at, they're talking about on page 63. And this is the idea. See, a lot of people, and if you didn't know what they were talking about, it'd make good sense that you could experience step 3 and step 3, and that when you did step 3, you'd have the relationship and the ability to overcome self and all that other stuff, the release of the bondage, that you'd have a new freedom and a new happiness. You're under the illusion that you're able to create surrender in step 3, which you are not. Because if you were able to do that, then would you need to do the rest of the steps? So step 3 is an idea of the ability to accomplish or experience if I carry on with the rest of the steps. It's an idea. So page 62 talks about the human dilemma, and the alcoholic is an extreme example of the human dilemma, right? Page 63 says there's a different experience, and they talk about that at the top of the page. They talk about the people that went through this course of action that have a new experience when they got access to power. Then they say, if you want this experience, we're now at step 3, we're going to show you how to have this experience that we have. And if you were able to have it in step 3, you wouldn't need to do any of the other steps. So when you look at the wording of step 3, page 63.
We are now at step 3. Many of us said to our Maker as we understood him, God, I offer myself to thee, to build with me and to do with me as thou wilt.
So what's God's will for you at this, or this power, this entity, the purpose of step 3? What is the purpose of where you're at right now in this process? What are you making a decision to do? To move forward, to get access to this power that will create the change. Having had a spiritual awakening is the result of these steps. I need to go through the process in order to experience this. If I was able to experience it in step 3, which a lot of us are under the delusion that we are, that I'm able to turn my will and life over every day without doing the work, is a form of delusion. What's our problem on page 62? We're driven by 100 forms of fear and self-delusion. Who's the only ones that don't think so? Us. And life makes it clear the way we're living isn't working. Full of resentment, conflict, self-pity, impending doom, calamity, full of resentments, harms, fears. Anybody have those bed buddies? Anybody's brain wake up before they do? Let's start again. Oh, we have a treat for you. And that's what they mean by the bondage. You're thinking. How many people have been in a meeting and they just think? Think. How many people are thinking right now?
Oh, yeah.
How many people get a thought and you're locked in the thought? You can't come back to the present. Some people start laughing, then you come back and go, what?
Yeah.
That's what they mean by the bondage and difficulties to overcome these things, to stay present. So these things that still lying within are still determining how we feel, think, and respond to life. They're all the stuff we carry from our past that they talked about in page 55. Did not these things, after all, determine how we think, feel, and react to life? Right? So we're able to smile at people, and we're stabbing them on the inside when we're thinking, hey, keep talking. Oh, yeah, I love you. Anybody try to go undetected, but inside you're like, ah! Every Wednesday at 7. So it's kind of like this. Here's the thing. How many people here is shared in a meeting? So, if they were to put your thinking on a board as you were sharing, oh yeah, would it be the same? Oh no. Hey, 5 minutes before the meeting, your teeth are grown, you're dragging your knuckles, yeah, you're hating everybody. You show up, it's like, hi. Acceptance, turn it over, surrender. And then somebody doesn't say something you like in a meeting and you lose your shit. Or they say something that you take personal and you carry it for the next 2 hours. Nobody like that here, right? Okay.
Relieve me of the bondage of self, that I may better do thy will.
So there's a process to be relieved of these things that I used to stumble on. There's a different experience. If you get relief from something that you used to have trouble with, are you not now learning to apply a solution where you get a different experience from what you're used to having? Right? So in order to do that, you need to get through the resentment part. You need to get through the inventory, right?
Take away my difficulties, that victory over them may bear witness to those I would help of thy power, thy love, and thy way of life. May I do thy will always. We thought well before taking the step, making sure we were ready.
So we know why we're doing it. We're willing to go to any lengths. We're up against the biggest battle we've ever faced in our lives, ourselves. But we can't do it alone, right? What they're saying is now you're going to get access to this power that you don't understand, that all these members went before you said, just try this thing and start experiencing it for yourself. And when you experience it for yourself, then no explanation's necessary after that. It's like anybody ever been on a roller coaster here? So when you explain, like when I went to Wonderland with one of my daughters, I thought she wanted to go on this one roller coaster. I said, they're all the same. Let's just go on this one over here. She says, no, I want to go on this one, Dad. So I'm in the lineup explaining to her that all roller coasters are the same. I haven't got the experience of going on this roller coaster, but I'm talking like I have the experience of going on this roller. I'm comforting her with my profound knowledge of something I haven't done yet. Welcome to an AA meeting. So, right? Come on. You don't have to show hands. We all 11 years in and out. Yeah. So I'm in this lineup. We're in a meeting. It's the same thing in the lineup, talking, blah, 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 hoping I can get this experience. I get on this ride. Well, before I was halfway through, I had a new experience. I was screaming louder than my daughter. The veins in my neck were popped up. I mean, I was hoarse. It was nothing. Even talking about it now is like I'm still having that experience. Do I sound excited when I'm talking about that? Because I have the experience of it. You'll be amazed before you're halfway through. When you have the experience of it, it's kind of like, whoa, this is what you're talking about? This is what I've been robbing myself of by not doing this process? So I went, what I found out after is one of the top 10 roller coasters in the world. It was called the Behemoth. You sit on a seat and you could see the ground and the railing, and you strip it, and there's this little thing you hang on like a bicycle. And there's like this. There's nothing. Okay. And then he's got click, 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 click. And that's our thinking process. Click, 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 click. And there you go. Everything. And then that's our recovery, right? So, anybody got the click, 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 click? Okay. So they're saying on the next page, they're saying alcohol is but a symptom, and then they give us this idea here. Therefore, we started upon a personal inventory. But backing up, they said the wording was quite optional so long as we express the idea. Step 3 is an idea that I can experience this if I go through the rest of the work. It's an idea that it's possible for me to have the same experience of all those who went before me. These things that are crippling me, these people found an answer to, right? If I'm just willing to go through this. So I call it, I had to redefine this whole thing. So when I started this thing, I got rid of all my religious teachings and background. I come from a charismatic background. So my idea of this religious thing and having a spiritual experience was far different than what people were suggesting, but I didn't know that because somebody said, come up with your own idea. And the idea I had, there was no way I was achieving it before because my family all got together at a charismatic movement and all voted that I was possessed and had a private meeting of the laying on of hands and casting out of demons. So now you say I've got to go through that again? I'm good. I'm good. Because of my preconceived ideas. So when I got here, it's like I abandoned all thought and experience that I had. I believed that there was something that they talked about. I was willing to do this course of action. So for me, it was, I don't know who or what you are, but I'm open to this. I need this experience or I'm going to die. I'm open to this. And that was my prayer. I don't know who or what you are. Show me. Show me what these people are talking about. That was my step 3. I'm open. Let's do this thing. Because step 3 here is a contract up at the top of the page. If we performed his work well, meaning if I leave these principles, he'll provide all that I need, not all that I want. That's a contract between me and source, power, God, creation, whatever you want to call it. That's your comfortability. I call it frequency now. Because when I travel at a low frequency, I'm on the Neanderthal instinct-based living. Right? I'm driven by different ideas. When I'm traveling at a higher frequency, I'm living by spiritual principles and I have a different experience. And that's what they talk about in 11. When I review my day, have I been instinct-based or am I spiritual-based? And I know the difference between the two because I went through the 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. Before you go through this experience, you wouldn't know how to tell the difference between the two. Because we're illusionists. Any illusionist here? We based a lot of our lives not on facts at all. Or not partial truths. Because we're the only group of people that don't really want to know the truth. Yes, I do. Good. Last time somebody was telling you the truth about you, when was the last time you talked to them after that? How many people get upset about them trying to tell you stuff about you that you don't want to know?
All the time.
All the time. Pisses you off, don't it?
Absolutely.
So you're finding out what everybody already knows. It's like alcoholism. This is a weird thing. How many people were surprised that everybody around you already knew you had a problem? How many people knew you had a problem before you knew you had a problem? And then when you knew you had a problem, you realized the problem's been there a long time. And that's what they talk about this process. When you go through with it, everybody around you will know something's happened, and then you'll suddenly realize that God's source, this process, is doing for you what you couldn't do for yourself. You suddenly realize that you've had a new experience as the result of living it. You'll just kind of go, there's something really different about everything. Right? So, the wording is quite optional. Then they talk about here, I need to learn a new process for processing life. On page, therefore we started upon a personal inventory. We're not going to get in, but that's what they're saying here. It's about a fact-finding, fact-facing process. Right? It's to find out the stuff inside of me that's working toward my demise. There's nothing in your story that you don't already know. How many people don't know their story here? How many people stuck to their story? How many people still crippled by their story, haunted, plagued? Right? That's what. So you know your story. So it's not the 90% of your story that you know. It's the 10% that caused it that you don't know what it is. So that's why they say we get down to causes and conditions, and then they get down here, and then they said so we did exactly the same thing with our lives. See that paragraph?
We did exactly the same thing with our lives. We took stock honestly. First, we searched out the flaws in our makeup which caused our failure.
How many people is okay with that? How many people like to hang on to their past so it becomes their future again?
Being convinced that self, manifested in various ways, was what had defeated us, we considered its common manifestation.
So if you look at the common areas, then you'd be able to use that recipe in all the other areas. Right? Once you learn the recipe in these major things, then you could use the same recipe on the smaller things. Does that kind of make sense? You're learning a new recipe. And so it doesn't make sense on what they're talking about. And so anybody over here, people say, oh, we have a spiritual disease. It's part of alcoholism. They don't read the book. The book doesn't say we have a spiritual disease. How many people just argued a bit in their brain? Because you hear it all the time. It must be true. Everybody says it. Let's see what the book says in regards to spiritual disease. Resentment, our best friend.
Okay. Resentment is the #1 offender. It destroys more alcoholics than anything else.
Right? So we got that, right? So what are we talking about? We're talking about resentments. Are we not talking about resentments now?
Yeah.
So, from it, right? So they're talking about resentments, right? The common manifestation on things that cripple us, that causes our failure, right?
From it stem all forms of spiritual disease.
From what? From the resentment that's connected to my consciousness. Is the abscess that's created through these resentments, these things that carry, that I'm still poisoning myself with, the things that I can't shake. When I relive them, it brings up all this emotion, and it's like I'm still there. It's an abscess on my spirit. My spirit is not sick. What it is carrying all this stuff on it that saves me from the experience of living the way I'm meant to live. From it stems all forms of spiritual disease. From the resentment stems all forms of spiritual disease. That's poisoning my system, is the resentment. Right? Is that what it says? Or okay.
For we have been not only mentally and physically ill.
We've covered that, right?
We have been spiritually sick. When the spiritual malady is overcome, we straighten out mentally and physically.
So they use the word malady there. When you look it up, it's not defined by one thing. It's hard to really define it because it exhibits itself in 100 different forms. It's really hard to pinpoint something that's happening at the subconscious level, because by the time we get the memo, the thought's already formulated. We'll find that we're already in thought before we don't create the thought's already created, and we become a part of something that's already happening. It's like going into a movie theater halfway through the movie. You become aware of what's on the screen, but then you realize you've been there the whole time. The movie's been playing all along. By the time you become aware of it, you're in it. Does that kind of make sense? Mm-hmm. Anybody ever watch a TV show, a commercial comes on, and you forget what you're watching? Because you get lost in thought. Anybody say, I'm not going to think about this anymore? And then you're heavy thinking about it. You don't go to yourself, oh, now's a good time to review this. You're in it. That's the bondage and difficulty. It's the abscess, these things that are coming to the surface that you're still carrying. Unless you find a solution for that, you will return to alcohol. Because it's an abscess. Anybody ever have an abscess here? Anybody ever have an infection or a sliver? When it all pusses up, it's a symptom of the sliver. Right? So in order to get rid of the pus, you need to get rid of the sliver. In order to get, this is the same thing. In order to get rid of the pain, you got to get rid of the resentment. It's like a sliver in our soul. It's creating this abscess. And it's been there all along. Anybody carrying shit for years? And that's what they're saying. You can be free of that, right? So they talk about, we made the list on one piece of paper. We added the name here on this piece of paper here. And put the one name, and then we put why we're mad at them all the way down here. We're as defined as the example on page 65, Mr. Brown. So we put Mr. Brown there, hypothetically. And then you see there's 5 or 6 causes. Then we do 5 or 6 causes all the way down the sheet. So if it's dad, mom, or an ex, you probably have 4 sheets on them. You don't write the story, you write something that engages your thought. It's like when I say the guy with the blue cap, does anybody know what I'm talking about? I know what I'm talking about because it brings me back to a time in my life where this created a lot of havoc in my life. Right? This situation with the blue cap. And it may sound kind of weird, but when I made the list, this guy with the blue cap came up, and he's never come up in any other inventory process I've ever done writing my own story out. But when I did this in meditation, you're learning how to meditate. Sit quietly, and your conscience will tell you what you're carrying. So I put the blue cap, and I thought, isn't that weird? Right? So 30 years ago, I put the blue cap down, and what happened when that happened was when I was 6 years old or 7 years old. I was on the way home from school, and I was in a street gang called the Demons in Toronto. I was trying to get home because the older kids would get a hold of me and beat me up, who was in an older gang. So I tried to get home before they get a hold of me. The one guy got a hold of me and was beating me up outside my laneway. The next door neighbor's dog, I was friend with, was an ex-police dog. It jumped the fence and grabbed the kid by the face. They put the dog down. I never thought about it again from that moment. So when the blue cap came up, if I would have disregarded that, I seen I was still carrying this thing that was so deeply buried, but in my meditation it came up. So these stupid ideas, that's stupid, I dealt with this, I don't have resentment. If it comes to mind, you write it down because there's something in your consciousness that's still attached to it. right? So that was just an example. So we went through this, and then we see what areas are affected. Was it my self-esteem? So on the next page, it talks about here, as the course of action to conclude others were wrong, but it talks about here, it is plain.
It is plain that a life which includes deep resentment
So
leads...
deep resentment, what does that mean? Does that mean you'll be able to home in on it all the time? It's deep. It shows up every once in a while. When you least expect it, it'll show up. The guy with the blue cap, that's deep. A lot of us, anybody have some deep stuff going on here? Anybody ever raised an alcoholic home? Or people abusive situation? We carry deep, we learn to live with that stuff and we bury it. It's buried. We just learn, it just becomes a part of us. We don't give it a second thought. But that stuff's still eating our lunch and determining our relationships with people, places, and things. We're on high alert all the time. Just anybody on high alert? My wife said that. She goes, I like going to conferences, but you people are intense. You always act like something's about to happen any minute. Because it is. She goes, you got an intensity about you guys. I said, really? We call it serenity. Well, I watched this couple. They were going to town in a public venue, at Burger King. They were just fighting. Their two kids were drawing like nothing was happening. But both of them were watching out of the corner of their eye if their parents were going to make a move on them or not. They're sitting there drawing on high alert like nothing was happening. Just totally desensitized to everything. So you get here, and then now you're going to start dealing with that stuff, and then what happens when it comes up? What do you do when it starts to resurface? What's the exercise? You do the third step prayer and remind yourself what this is about. It's about a fact-finding, fact-facing process. It's not about reliving. It's about separating yourself from the story so you can be an observer of it, but some of it, you still have the emotional ties to it. And the prayer starts cutting the ties to it. Some of it you'll have to carry in your 6, right? And then in 10 and 11, and some of it will take the rest of your life to find peace with it. But you'll be able to deal with it. That's the difference. Before you're not able to deal with it. Now you're able to compartmentalize it where it's not eating your lunch. You're able to acknowledge it, revamp the story so you find peace from it and move forward from it. If you don't have this exercise, you won't be able to do that. You'll still be eating your lunch. Does that kind of make sense? And so this is what they're getting, deep resentment.
It is plain that a life which includes deep resentment leads only to futility and unhappiness.
See, I didn't know what that stuff was until I got it all on paper, because I didn't think I had any resentments. I just had a list of people to get even with still. See, all this had to be explained to me. My step 8 was I never did nothing to nobody that didn't have it coming to them. So I was a little warped. I know it's hard to believe looking at me now. Like I was like, really? Like nuts. My sponsors walked me through this slowly and explained what it meant. The resentment was the things you still think about, harbor, these things. I just wrote, he says, write all the people you still need to get even with. Okay. It was a long list. Write all the people that ever harmed you. Okay. And then he says, these are resentments. You refeel, replay. I'm like, oh, wow. I didn't know that. It took the process to see what these things meant and how they exhibit themselves in my life as fact-finding, fact-facing process. I see how I start to operate now with the same recipe that we all apply. How I respond to life and these basic instincts will be different than how you respond to life. But it's a response to life. So this is a response about me. What will create high alert in me may be a relaxing situation for you. But I see how I operate about the truth about the stock and trade. So I'm aware of these things when I get into 10 and mostly in 11. Because when they resurface, I'm able to see, oh, my self-esteem, my spirit, personal, my material, these things are showing up, and it's showing up in my relationship and at work. So I step backwards and see where am I at spiritually with these things. I say, fear is the basis of this. I've been trying to solve it myself and creating myself more problems. So in step 11, it says, it asks, what corrective measures can I take? That means when I wake up the next day still having that problem, I approach it differently. I approach it by applying these spiritual principles instead of applying myself on an instinct basis, getting a different result. Right? So the whole magic to this whole thing is actually step 11. Most people don't get past step 10 because our first obsession is fixing ourselves. This is not about working on us. That's stage 1 recovery. You think it's about working on you. It's about getting to stage 2 recovery, where you're working on your relationship with something greater than you that fixes your problem.
To the precise extent that we permit these, do we squander the hours that might have been worthwhile?
Why do we permit these? Because we have a solution now. Right? That doesn't have to be our story anymore. All that stuff doesn't have to eat our lunch, right?
But with but with the alcoholic, whose hope is the maintenance and growth of a spiritual experience, this business of resentment is infinitely grave. So
where we got to last week, we found out that we're always going to have resentments because we're instinct-based people. But we need to learn how to master them, the ones that we're going to accumulate now and the ones that are still eating our lunch. So once you've dealt with this, it's no longer a resentment when you carry it forward. Once you've gone through this process, it's no longer a resentment, it's an attachment in step 6. It's something you're carrying forward. So in step 6, you acknowledge the things that are still carrying forward or still causes you emotional deformities that you're bringing forward, that you apply these solutions to when they arise again. Does that kind of make sense? So on the next page, we talked about these prayers last week, right? So this was our course. Let's start from there. We might go a couple of minutes over, but it's okay. At the bottom of so we're going to learn how to master resentment. They're going to tell you this is how you do it.
This was our course. We realized that the people who wronged us were perhaps spiritually sick.
Instinct-based. They couldn't do it any different if they tried. It wasn't personal, right? You see them differently, the same way we start seeing ourselves. The reason I did those things is because I was spiritually sick. I was driven by resentment, fear, and alcoholism. I couldn't have done it different. It wasn't personal. I didn't make that conscious decision to do those things. I couldn't have done it any different given those circumstances in that moment. Anybody have that life?
Yeah. Though we did not like their symptoms and the way these disturbed us, they, like ourselves, were sick too.
So if I start looking at them different like that, I start separating my attachment to them.
We asked God to help us show them the same tolerance, pity, and patience that we would cheerfully grant a sick friend.
Where does this happen? Internally, in your thinking. Because a lot of these resentments, you don't see these people, places, and things. So when they resurface themselves, you apply this prayer, you start looking at them differently. And if you show kindness and all, if you practice this within your own thinking, well, your thinking start changing. Mm-hmm. How many people want to be free? That's what they're saying. I need to be free of these things because these people, I'm either the jailer or the prisoner. In this case, I'm both.
When a person offended, we said to ourselves, "This is a sick man. How can I be helpful to him? God, save me from being angry. Thy will be done." We avoid retaliation or argument.
Where? Mentally. We're starting to correct it before it becomes a problem. How many people do that exercise now? How many people just make them pay again? How many people do a lot of retaliation and argument in their brain? We already know the truth, right? Get gunned off a bit, right? We're all like this. They're saying, hey, guess what? You're not alone. This is all our dilemma, right? So if we correct the argument and the retaliation in your own thinking, is it going to change your emotional state in the moment? Is it going to change your attachment? Is it going to change your anxiety level? Is it going to change your experience with people, places, and things in the moment? Will you be more receptive to the people around you? When you're in a resentment and you're experiencing these harms or these angst or these resentments, how personable are you? Anybody ever been in a resentment? Ask them, what?
Yeah.
Whoa, sorry. Okay.
We avoid retaliation or argument. We wouldn't treat sick people that way. If we do, we destroy our chance of being helpful. We cannot be helpful to all people, but at least God will show us how to take a kindly and tolerant view of each and every one. Referring to our list again, putting out of our minds the wrongs others had done.
This is the 4th column now.
We resolutely looked for our own mistakes. Where had we been selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, and frightened?
So we see, when we entirely look at it from a different angle, it's because of my selfishness, my inconsideration, dishonesty, and fear that have these people in my life, or this situation reoccurring based on one of my instincts. Because of my self-esteem, I was self-seeking. And I sought this person who wasn't good for me, but they did something for me. I stayed in a job that was abusive because I was afraid of my material or emotional. I stayed in this relationship because I couldn't afford to rent myself. Anybody got those things? So we see 90% of the stuff that's happening in my life I've created based on one of my instincts running amok. It's like with Kim. Kim was on there. Before I went out with Kim, everybody told me what Kim was like. But I thought she wouldn't be like that with me. Because I'll be able to change her. Yeah. And then when she was like that with me, I was really sore. But who put myself in that situation? Me, because it built my self-esteem, my security. I got something from the relationship, even though it was working toward my demise. Stayed with her 7 years. Most of my scars are from her. We loved each other. I haven't found that kind of love since. Thank you, Jesus.
Though the situation had not been entirely our fault, we tried to disregard the other person involved entirely. Where were we to blame? The inventory was ours, not the other man's. When we saw our faults, we listed them. We placed them before us in black and white. We admitted our wrongs honestly and were willing to set these matters straight.
So, on the end of the page here, are we willing to set these matters straight? What are they talking about?
Step 9.
Step 9? How many people say step 9? How many people say within inside your own self? Yeah. You change the story. You're willing to look at it differently. And as you become spiritually fit through doing these exercises, so now we got 2 prayers. We got the third step prayers for me. We got the resentment prayers, my attachment to people, places, and things. Right? So I'm applying one of these 2 things when my past starts to resurface or I get attachment to these things, and I'm willing to look at it differently. So, even though the situation had not been entirely our fault, a lot of us will go right away to situations that weren't our fault. We get stuck there. Anybody? What they're saying is that with my stepfather, he was one of the meanest people I ever met in my life ever since. He escaped from the Second World War. He was just under the SS. He was an atheist, and he was one of the meanest people I ever met. The stories in the life and the things that he did was unbelievable. He used to beat me within an inch of my life. The guy was just brutal. So it was hard to find out where, but I was antagonistic. I'd drop a record player on his head. I'd put insulation in his bed. I would just make him pay, right? Pee in his coffee. I mean, I was a kid. Make you pay. So I got a sick sense of satisfaction that I was getting the better of you, right? So I'd antagonize. So even though, no, I'm not saying because I looked at him differently when I learned all those things about it. I seen why he was the way he was, and then I had to look honestly how I was. I was a nightmare at school. I was an embarrassment to my family. I was in the street gang, like on and on and on. The things I was doing, burned the neighbor's garage down. Like the police were showing up all the time. So I could see what he was trying to correct me, but I took that personal. And it went to an extreme because he was not right in his head. And he was the guy that I had to start. It was really weird. He was the guy when I was probably 4, and he sat me on a porch in Toronto. And there was a lightning storm, like no rain, like an electrical storm, like you've never seen lighting up the whole sky and cracking. And I'm just horrified. And he's looking at me and he says, you know what that is, you little bastard? He says, God's mad at you. That's why this is happening. I went upstairs under my bed and I was begging God not to be mad at me. So every time there was a lightning storm, I'd get that feeling of guilt that God was mad. Like, beep, 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 beep. Like, find a God of your understanding? I don't think so. I don't think so. But the willingness to do this process started getting me connected to Source. I started getting freedom from my past. It's like I don't know why this thing works when I apply this prayer and the willingness to do something that don't make sense. I started getting relief. And I started correcting these things, and I started getting relief from it. I started mastering resentment. I started having a new experience by accessing source, which is this entity or this thing deep down within me. So when I got disturbed, I learned how to go quiet and go back to that place. I don't know who or what you are. I need some help. And I'd get relief. Or I'd go to a meeting, and somebody would just home in on me. Like God, the fellowship of the Spirit is, as God's people, we know each other on a different level than what we see. You ever see some people and you just know all about them and you just connect with them and you help them walk from the place that they couldn't get out on their own? That's what this whole thing is about, and this is a start of. So you're not going through your fourth alone. You're accessing this power, right? You're looking at it on a spiritual basis to get freedom from this thing. It works. It didn't say you have to understand it. It says try it. You should have a sponsor. You should have somebody who's familiar with the book, and just try it and see if you get any relief. And next week we'll have even more fun. So what's the key ingredient to longevity?
God,
grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference.
We have the worksheets back there if you want to get caught up, and next week we'll do some revising.